Greetings and welcome to this episode of EMS Now Up Close. I'm Eric Miskell, and the gentleman on the screen with me, most of you will recognize. It's head Dieter Weiss from in4ma, and also now with Data4PCB, excuse me. It's a tongue twister, and I'll ask you about that when we go. Dieter, welcome to the United States. I understand you've decided to come over and revisit the United States. And it's good to have you here. I feel better knowing you're on the same continent with me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eric. It's a pleasure being here. I'm having some specific meetings over here, and besides that, I'm gonna visit 2 or 3 EMS companies in the United States in order to just look over the ocean to see how they work over here, because I haven't seen any factories so far in the United States, at least not EMS factories.
Well, you'll have to let me know your impressions afterwards. That'll be
yes.
They will have SMT lines as well, Dita. So don't be surprised
Really?
when you see them, right? We got
and
they
do THC as well, right?
Yes. So yeah, we got all that going on. So
yeah.
Hey, listen, I wanted to talk to you because you did again and released here a while back your kind of a mid-year survey report for the European EMS industry, and I had a chance to review that. And just did that again here this afternoon in advance of this. Data rich, a lot of information, super good report. I think great benchmarking data for people. So I'll make a pitch for you. If you're an EMS and, European EMS, I think there's some great data that could be used for benchmarking purposes to gauge your operations against. So, so kudos to you, sir, for that. It's a great report. So.
Thank you. Well, I can tell you the situation this year is so dramatic that for the first time I did not only get requests from normal EMS companies in Europe to buy the report, but as well from 3 global companies who are having operations in Europe as well, and they wanted to get a better picture. And we all know you only get a better picture of the situation if you're talking with real numbers and not just estimations or non-official numbers or rumors. That all doesn't help you. And I am known for having real numbers, and that is important. And
absolutely.
Today we have 2 different groups of people in this industry. One group is a group who participate in the surveys we do, and they get qualified data, and they once in a while as well, after they receive the data, they call us up and want some further explanation and want to see whether their interpretation of the data is correct. That is the one group. And the other group is those smart people who think they know it all and they don't need data. They just look at their revenues and they are the greatest, and and then they wonder where have all the orders gone. And that is the subject today. Where have all the orders gone?
Well, and let's dive into that. I don't want to give away too much of your data because obviously there's a report behind it that I'd want to encourage people to contact you to hopefully purchase. But let's talk kind of big picture. Like you just said, it's trying times for the EMS industry, not just in Europe, but also globally. And I think, these trends and what you discuss are not unique to the European market. It's clear, and you've done some analysis of that as well, I know, looking at the global companies and how the same data sets compare. So maybe start big picture. I mean, I see that, I was looking at your data there, how the growth in 22, the growth in 23, it was a little slower in 23. And then you have your first half, kind of what's happening first half of based on the survey that you did in 2024. And you also have a forecast, frankly, so we can get to that later. But how would you characterize the current state of European EMS industry?
Well, and I have to dig into detailed number to explain that. 2022, the European market grew by 16.4%. A growth rate this industry has never, ever seen in the past. 16.4. Even in the East, it was 16.3. In the West, it was 16.4. And then came 23. And in the West, we still had nearly 10% in growth rate, which I have to admit in the majority was in the first half and not in the second half, because we saw the slowdown of the industry already in the second half. In the East, we have a very specific thing. You need to know that we have three big players: Foxconn, Flex, and Jabil. And these three players, they account, and Foxconn has 6 factories in Europe, Jabil has 6 factories in Europe, Flex has 6 factories in Europe. And in total, they account for about 28, and in 22, even 30% of the European revenue. So that's a big chunk. Yeah? And it is always difficult for us to make predictions without knowing what those three companies are doing. That is a big burden to us. But finally, we are now able to know the data, for example, of Foxconn already in April of the following year. And this was a big surprise to us that Foxconn had nearly 2 billion in revenues less. You remember maybe that Foxconn had on a global level minus 10.2% in revenues in 23. But in Europe, it was minus 20.2%, nearly 2 billion. And that had a tremendous impact on Eastern Europe, bringing Eastern Europe down to a negative number. And even the nice positive number still in the West couldn't absorbs that, and that is why in 23 we only had in Europe a total of about 4.2, 4.3% in growth rate, but still it was positive. And then comes all of a sudden, boom, 24, the first half, and if I just take the numbers from the survey, we are talking about more than 12% minus, and specifically Germany was hit a lot with minus 16.4%, Switzerland even worse. Yeah, but as well Austria and a lot of other countries, they all suffered, and that is a point which you have to ask why that is a fact. And I'm not giving you the answer on that. Yeah. I have the answer, and anybody attending the IPC Day EMS on the 25th of September in Gdansk, Poland, he will get very, very clear answers from me what the reasons were. But today that is not important. The important thing is what can we do?
Well, hold on. Let me ask you a question.
Situation.
Let me ask a question before we get into that. Let's open that up a little bit. So how is it by revenue sizes? You talked about, Foxconn, Flex, and Jabil having about roughly 30% of the market there. And obviously those are market movers is what that position gives them. But within that, there's a lot of small. You have, I think, over 2,000 EMS that you've identified within Europe. So, the customers served by those big three are vastly different than those customers served by the smaller end of it.
Yeah, well, you
So
have
how
read
was
it.
that? How was it experienced across the
Yeah,
different?
you have read the survey report, and you have seen that we were able, with the total amount of more than 100 companies reporting their numbers in Germany only, we were able again to form 6 groups, revenue groups. Yeah, and similar to Foxconn, the big ones were hurt the most. Whereas the small one, as well, working in different fields, they suffered as well, but not that much. And again, you cannot say everybody has been suffering. No, no, no. And we show that in the report as well. That about 75% of all companies suffered, but there were as well winners. Companies, and I had 2 or 3 companies who were able in the first half of 24 to increase their revenues by more than 50% year over year. Yeah. So yes, you have to ask yourself, why is that the case? And I can only tell you, this is a matter of a company strategy. And you have to clearly develop your company strategy. As long as you think, oh, I take everything I get, I'm a me too. Yeah, yeah. You're gonna be a me too loser. Yeah, and it doesn't work that way. And if you look at the real big companies, yeah, let me just name a couple, like for example Plexus. Yeah, Plexus focusing on a certain area, like for example the majority that is medical electronics. Yeah, and they are doing well with focusing on that. And we have similar companies in Europe as well. If we compare the public companies, and we do have in Europe 9 public companies who are dealing in the EMS industry. And out of these 9 companies, the majority had about, on average, minus 10% in revenues year over year in the first half of 24. But there has been another company, and I'm not keeping my mouth shut, that was Sycor.
Yeah.
Sycor, and I've said that already in the annual report. Sycor is doing a very, very professional company strategy, and I don't have too many internals. Well, I know the CEO, Alexander Hagemann. You met him as well. We had to have him at the seminar in Ulm this year as a keynote speaker. He's a very smart and a professional person, and he has a very smart CFO on his side. But on top of that, they have a shareholder, not a majority shareholder, but I think they are running at 32%, which is One Equity Partners. Now, if we look at the United States, there is an EMS company who's lately doing very well as well, since they have been taken over by One Equity Partner, and that is Spartronics. Spartronics is doing very well, and they are focusing on aerospace and defense. What does Sycor do? They focus on aerospace and defense. Their latest acquisitions in the UK have been focused solely on this area. And you can more or less say today, Sycor is more or less the biggest defense electronics manufacturer in the UK on a service level as an EMS company. So very professional.
Yeah. So when
that
you
is not the only way you can work. If you specialized in certain products, and here I cannot mention the products, because then you immediately know what the company I'm talking about. And in this case, it's not a public company, so I have to watch out for compliance reason. I cannot tell too much. But if you have a dedicated strategy, and the dedicated strategy you build with qualified market data, then you are much better off than if you just think, I'm
Yeah.
a me too, I take everything I can get.
Let me just summarize that then. So, and without betraying the confidences, and I think I know what you were going to talk about there. You're talking about having that a strategy that might be focused on, as you indicated, the sectors that you choose to participate in, where you could bring value, but then also the services that you choose to bring to the market. And how you execute on those services for your customers. And those services could be some non-traditional EMS services as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And um, actually, we see a similar, and that, by the way, is something where you have to say you can clearly identify the countries who are gaining on that. Yeah.
And that was going to be my next
I
question.
remember I
Yeah.
have done a chart on that on
Yeah.
defense electronics in the EMS industry. The chart is 2 years old, and the biggest country which is subcontracting electronics for defense industry is France.
Mm.
Yeah. And the second biggest is UK.
Yeah.
And then comes long time nothing, and then come Germany and Italy. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I've had this discussion last week with a big PCB manufacturer as well, who asked me, well, why are we having so much problems on the one hand, and our competitors in France and in the UK are doing much better? Well, that's a reason. They
Mm.
are working in the market segment of aerospace and defense electronics, the PCB manufacturers in France and in the UK, and they don't suffer.
Yeah.
Whereas everybody who, and just switching now to the PCB side of it, everybody on the PCB side who has been working in bigger quantities, yeah, bigger lot sizes, those are the orders that at the moment are going to the Far East. Because with all these problems the EMS industry is having at the moment, yeah, remember in 2023, they hired more than 6% more labor. And even so, they are now reducing this labor again, because we have plenty of companies who only work at the moment 3 days a week because they don't have orders for more. Yeah. So there is a cost issue here. And what do they do first? They say, well, we don't care about the PCB manufacturer. We just send these orders out to the Far East because we can save money by doing so. So the PCB manufacturers are suffering more than the EMS manufacturers do. And again, we see huge differences in the countries. And again, we see as well that the big companies are suffering more because they are manufacturing higher lot sizes, whereas the small companies who are just doing 2 or 3 or 4 million in revenues, yeah, they still have a reasonable load because they manufacture smaller lot sizes. And if we are talking about prototyping and all of that, a lot of that is still being handled in Europe.
Yeah. Let me ask you, you talked about, one of the issues, and I don't want to go too far down this, is some of the data that you have, that there are the inventory levels. And you talk about if 15% roughly has been a normal level for many EMS over the last few years, they certainly exceeded.
Inventory.
Yeah, inventory levels. They certainly have exceeded that. But what we also see is while business is down, there's some burn off consumption of that existing inventory happening. How do you characterize, where are we today? How are the with the EMS companies today?
Well, I can tell you the real numbers. End of 22, we had excessive, not total inventory, but excessive, which excessive meaning more than 15%,
Okay.
yeah, of revenue. That equaled excessive inventory of 6.4 billion euros in excessive inventory. End of 23, that was still at 5.2 billion. And now, in the first half of 24, the industry has been able to reduce that to 3.5 billion. So we are nearly now in a situation that we were able to reduce it by, let's say, 48, 47% from the 22 numbers. But still, it's too much.
But that's the excessive. What you're sizing there is the excess, what you're calling the excess inventory, not that's above the 15%.
Exactly. See, the 15% in Europe in 23, we had 55.1 billion in revenues. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the normal level of inventory would be 8.25 billion in raw goods inventories, yeah.
Right.
And on top of those 8.25 come now the 3.5 billion, yeah.
Okay.
So we are still talking about more than 11 billion. And there, see, that's the interesting thing. We all have seen the data of DMAS, the European Association, who is reporting those numbers. And the distributors have been suffering really, really badly. Yeah, for the last 6 quarters, they constantly saw a reduction in their revenues for semiconductors. Yeah, and in the first half of this year, they had a reduction of 24%. And I have to say that immediately, that is only Europe. I'm not calculating the MENA states, North Africa, and so on with that, because they did that. Yeah, so that is really bad. Yeah, much worse than what the EMS industry is suffering. On the other hand, hey, remember 2 years ago at Electronica? All distributors having big parties at Electronica, yeah, celebrating record revenues.
Yep.
No, they get the bill for it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's always one day is payday, and it's payday for them now.
Yeah.
And by their, in my opinion, totally wrong strategy, they opened up a new competitor, and that is European brokers who, and I talked last week with one of them, who is very successful. He is going out to all these companies and collecting at least the data on the excessive inventory and trying to sell that to other companies. So it's typical brokerage, but specifically collecting data from the European electronics industry and then trying to sell that on a global scale in order to help the industry reduce inventory level. And that industry had not been there before. And now it is there besides the distributors. And if I was a distributor, I wouldn't consider that very funny. But
Yeah.
it's their own fault.
Yeah. So concurrent with this too, as I thought I saw a reference to, is you see the OEM's buffer stock, right? What they built up that they've been holding is trending down as well. They're starting to burn off some of their buffer stock, which should, how do you see that going this year? And
Yes.
do you have a
Well,
sense of that?
you saw that in the half-year survey, we asked as well what the expectation of the industry is in regards to the second half of this year.
Right.
And the answer was on average that they expect the second half of this year to be about 2.4% better than the first half, which is not too much, but if they answered the question right, it is very precise, because on the order backlog of the EMS industry is normally ranging in the region of 150 to 200 days. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so normally they know exactly today already, and they knew that as well a month ago when we did the survey, what they have on hand in orders for the second half of this year. And there is not much extra to be expected.
Right.